At the first light of dawn, the village gathered in silence. The child stood alone at the edge of the compound, unmoving, barefoot on the cold earth. His eyes were open, but they did not blink. When his mother called his name, the name of the man who had died, the child answered in a voice that was not his own. No breath rose from his chest, no shadow followed his feet. And as the elders slowly backed away, one question hung in the morning air. Who truly woke up in that child's body? Why did the child begin to speak words no child was ever taught? Why did the elders, men and women who had faced war, famine, and death, refuse to call him by his name? And why, whenever that name was spoken aloud, did the air grow heavy, as if something unseen had drawn closer? Across ancient African societies, names were never chosen lightly. They were believed to carry breath, memory, and destiny. Stay with this story, because by the end, you will understand why naming a child after the dead was not an honor, but a door, and why some doors were never meant to be opened. This story comes from a time before borders were drawn, before clocks ruled the day, when African villages lived by the rhythm of the earth and the memory of their ancestors. In those days, the night was not empty. It breathed. Crickets spoke, fires whispered, and the moon watched in silence. Knowledge did not live in books. It lived in voices, passed from elders to children through stories told beside glowing embers, where the living listened, and the ancestors were believed to listen as well. To ancient Africans, the world was divided into realms. The living walked beneath the sun. The dead rested beyond the veil, close enough to guide, but never meant to return uninvited. Names were the bridge between these worlds. They were believed to carry identity, spirit, and remembrance. And so, a sacred rule was kept across generations. A child must never be given the name of the dead, because to call that name was not just to remember, it was to summon. And when that rule was broken, the elders warned, the ancestors stirred, and the balance between worlds did not remain at peace. The child was born at the end of the rainy season, when the earth was soft and the air still carried the scent of new life. His parents named him after his grandfather, a respected man whose death had left an empty place in the village. To them, the name was an act of honor, a way to keep a memory alive, a way to soothe grief that had never fully healed. But among the people, the joy was quiet. Smiles were forced. Conversation stopped when the child passed. Elders lowered their voices, warning that some names were too heavy for newborns to carry. They said the dead must be remembered, not repeated. Yet the parents did not listen. They believed love was stronger than old fears. They believed respect could not cause harm. And in that belief, in that quiet defiance of ancestral wisdom, the first seed of trouble was planted. Before the child was presented to the ancestors, the elders came. They spoke gently at first, reminding the parents of the old laws kept long before their own fathers were born. They asked that the name be changed, that the child be given a name belonging to the living, not one already claimed by the earth. But the parents refused. Some said the elders were ruled by fear. Others laughed and called the warning stories meant for another time. And so, the naming ceremony went on. Libations were poured, drums sounded, the child was lifted, and the forbidden name was spoken aloud. The fire crackled, then suddenly fell silent. In that same moment, the child stopped crying and turned his face toward the forest, as if something there had answered the call. The elders did not speak. They did not need to. Not long after the ceremony, the village began to notice small things. The child spoke early. Not the broken sounds of infancy, but full words, spoken with calm certainty. He named places he had never visited, recognized faces he had never met, and once called an elder by a childhood name long forgotten. The parents said it was coincidence. Others wondered, was this memory or remembrance? But that was not the worst part. At night, the dreams began. Elders woke to the sound of chanting without voices. Symbols appeared in ash and dust, markings once used to honor the dead. Some claimed they heard footsteps circling their homes, stopping only when the child's name was whispered. The elders gathered in silence, fear heavy on their faces, unwilling to say aloud what they already knew. And then, what happened next changed everything. Illness spread where there had been strength. Crops failed in fertile soil. Minds wandered where wisdom once lived. Mothers spoke in hushed tones. Fathers avoided the child's path, and in every corner of the village, the same name was spoken carefully, as though saying it too loudly might invite something closer. But no one yet dared to ask what had truly answered when that name was called. Then, one evening, as the sun sank behind the distant hills, something impossible happened. The child, who had once been small and fragile, began to speak with a voice that was not his own. It was deeper, slower, filled with a weight no infant could carry. He spoke of journeys he had never taken, of secrets only the departed would know. He told stories of the village long before the parents' time, of ancestors whose names were never spoken aloud. At first, the parents believed it was mimicry or a strange gift of memory, but fear began to creep into their hearts when he repeated things that only their late grandfather could have known, things that had never been shared, not even with the elders. It was then they realized the truth. By giving him the name of the dead, they had opened a doorway. Across ancient African societies, elders taught that a name was never just a word. It was a vessel, a binding thread between the living and the spirits. To speak a name aloud was to call the spirit, to invite it to cross the veil. The honor they had intended, the pride they felt, had become a dangerous invitation, and, as the child's eyes turned toward the darkened forest, the parents understood the gravity of what they had done, that in their desire to remember the dead, they had invited the dead to remember them. From that night onward, the child was no longer fully theirs. His small body moved, yes, but his mind, his words, even his very presence seemed guided by something older, something beyond the living. The parents tried to correct him, to call him by his own name, to soothe him with lullabies, but their voices fell on ears that belonged to another. Fear began to seep through the village like smoke. Children cried in the night for no reason. Livestock fell ill without cause. Crops failed, even under the care of the most diligent farmers. Whispers grew louder. The villagers spoke the child's name only in hushed tones, and even then, hearts pounded as though calling it aloud might summon what had already arrived. The parents were consumed by guilt. Each laugh of the child sounded hollow. Each calm glance seemed to weigh their very souls. They understood that what they had intended as honor had become a curse. The elders gathered by the fire, carrying ashes, water, and charms. They murmured prayers older than memory, attempting to cleanse the village, to undo the summoning, to send the spirit back beyond the veil. But even as they performed the rituals, questions gnawed at every heart. Could the spirit be sent back once it had crossed? Was the child still the child they had brought into the world, or merely a vessel now? And in the quietest moments, when the winds rustled through the trees, even the elders dared not speak the answer aloud. On the night when the moon hung low and heavy over the village, the elders called the parents to the clearing. The firelight flickered against the trees, casting shadows that seemed to move on their own. The child stood in the center, eyes wide and unblinking, a stillness that was both human and not human. The elders spoke aloud the names of the ancestors, invoking rituals older than the village itself, calling on the spirits to witness, to judge, to decide. And then it spoke, not the child, but the presence that had crossed through the spoken name. Its voice echoed, low and deep, recounting the danger that had been ignored, the sacred laws that had been broken. The truth was laid bare. Names were not just remembrance. They were gateways. The honor of the parents had become an invitation, and the spirit had claimed what had been offered. After a long silence, the elders acted, guiding the spirit back to the realm of the dead. Through chants, offerings, and ancient signs, the presence receded, leaving the child trembling, yet changed forever. One consequence remained, irreversible. The child would carry the echo of the spirit within, a shadow in his eyes that no ritual could erase, a living reminder that some names must never be spoken aloud. As dawn broke over the village, a quiet settled among the huts. The fires burned low. The wind whispered softly through the trees, and for the first time in many nights, the village slept without fear. The child remained among them, but the echo of what had passed lingered in his eyes, a reminder to all that some doors, once opened, could never be fully closed. The elders spoke again of the sacred rule, never name a child after the dead. And so the lesson passed from parent to child, from generation to generation. Names carry power. They bind spirit, memory, and destiny. The dead must remain among the dead, and the living must honor that boundary. And as the elders always say, the ears that ignore the warnings of the ancestors will one day listen to the whispers of regret. In that silence, the village remembered and never again forgot.